Did you know that there's actually 7 essential elements that every contract needs to have in order to be legally valid? And if you aren't doing these things in your client contracts, it could be costing you big bucks or at least some sleep at night. So let's dive into what these 7 things are. Welcome back. I'm the attorney and founder behind The Contract Shop, and today we're bringing this video here to you to make sure that you understand what it is that your contract needs to have in order to provide the best possible service for your clients and also to protect your business. It's really funny because a lot of people think that a short contract is actually better. They don't want to scare their clients off with a longer agreement, but there is kind of a minimum length that a contract needs to be in order to be effective. This is actually a certain minimum length just because it needs to include certain elements so that both you and your clients are protected. And the first thing it needs to include that I often see left out is a description of what is actually provided for. Now, this is incredibly helpful if you are ever in a dispute with a client about scope creep where they start to ask you for a little more than they should, those little like 5 p.m. on a Friday requests. Well, we can always go back to the contract and look and see what was described in the services. Do they have any kind of after hours access to you at an increased rate? Do they have a certain number of hours that are only available per month and then that's it? Defining these things in your description of services is really crucial, and this is definitely a place that you don't want to skimp out on. Of course, you can always change or add to these later as needed using an amendment. I've covered this in other videos, so I'll link to those below, or you can just have some fun binge watching the channel. The next thing your contract has to have is some sort of acceptance. And a lot of people think this has to be a signature, but that's not true. So if you were to send a contract with an invoice to a client and they just paid the invoice, but they didn't sign the contract, that's actually considered an acceptance. So it's a better idea to try to get that signature if you sent the contract and it needs a signature. But if that isn't always possible or the client overlooked it and you just got the payment, that is an alternative form of acceptance in lieu of a signature. And their payment leads me to a third thing you want to make sure you have in all your contracts, which is an outline of the payment schedule, if there is a schedule, or if it's just a lump sum, exactly how much money needs to be delivered and by what date. And it's very important to make sure that all these numbers are memorialized in the client contract so that you don't have to go through a bunch of emails or go back and forth or negotiate after the fact, after you've already negotiated into this agreement with the client. We want to make sure everything is just really clean, neat, and tidy, and that if the client ever has questions, they can go back to the contract. They don't need to be taking up your time or your VA or admin's time, and they have all those answers available to them all the time. The fourth thing that every contract should consider is the end. We always want to start with the end in mind so that we know what happens if one of us needs to cancel, either because it's just not working out or because of life circumstances, like one of you gets pregnant or sick, or just because you decide to move on and stop offering that service that you were having with that client. There's lots of reasons why this agreement might come to an end, but the only thing that we know for sure is that it will end at some point. So we want to make sure that we start with that end in mind, and we make sure that we have a way out of that contract if we need to, and that our clients also understand how they can terminate their relationship with us, because they're not going to work with us forever. There's going to be other things that come up, other clients that come up for us, and bigger and better opportunities later that might mean that we retire some of our services, or like I said, life events that help us to push those back under the rug, back from where they came, and moving on to bigger and better adventures. Number 5, I know this sounds kind of obvious, but you want to make sure that the right people and the right contact information is inside of your contracts. And if you're working with clients on a long-term basis, like more than a couple months, people move sometimes, and you always want to have that updated contact information available to you for sending holiday gifts, or if anything happens and you actually need to get in touch with that person, or like you have to sue them or something like that. Collecting this information in the contract can be an easy, stress-free way for your clients to just know that you already collected that information in the event that you ever need it. Plus, it can be a nice way for you to look back and be like, oh, where did I put their information? And you always know it's available in the contract. But the other thing it allows you to do is just on an annual basis, go through and update that information and anything else in the contract that you might need. So speaking of that, number 6 that you'll want to make sure that you include is some kind of clause that allows you to amend or add on to the contract, because if you are working with someone on a longer term basis, there are going to be things that come up that you weren't expecting when you first entered into that relationship. So make sure that you do have something that allows you to amend it. In our contract templates at the contract shop, we always make sure that you can amend it in writing, which also includes an email. So as long as that email is acknowledged by both parties according to the clause that we have in our contract, then that is a valid amendment. You don't have to resend an entire agreement every single time you re-up with a client and renew your services and working with them, or renew for another year or whatever it might be. And finally, number 7 is you want to always consider what happens in the event that somebody doesn't pay on time or you actually need to enforce your contract. So having clauses in your agreement that talk about what happens when there's a late payment. What is a late payment? Is it 2 days late? Is it 3 days late? Is it a month late? What actually constitutes a late payment? And also having clauses in there that consider what do you actually have to do in order to have some sort of legal remedy if your client doesn't pay at all, or they just kind of go missing on you, or they do something else that is against the rules that are stated in the contract. So you need to have some sort of, usually it's an arbitration clause or some kind of mediation clause, and those are just 2 fancy legal words for how are you guys going to figure this thing out without the court system, or alternatively, are you only going to duke it out in court, which is a lot more expensive, a lot harder to do for both of you, frankly. So even if you're in the right. And then a little bonus one for you is if you need it, you might consider a confidentiality provision. So if you are working with high profile clients, or if you just really want to make sure that your work is protected, if you're a designer and you want to make sure that your business process is protected, always having some sort of confidentiality clause can be really helpful in the event that, say your client takes your process and takes it to a new designer who's less expensive, or whatever the case may be. So having that confidentiality clause protects both your clients, and it also protects you from a client taking your intellectual property, or a business method or something that you've worked on together and using that with a new service provider. We've gone over a lot that you want to include in your client service agreements, but there's still a lot more, which is why I have the Rock Solid Contract Checklist linked below, or you can just go to rocksolidcontract.com. And you'll also want to check out the other videos all about contracts on this channel or on our blog at thecontractshop.com, because it could really be a bingeable, almost like a mini course if you decide to make it into that. So, if you have a Saturday morning, you just want to take a deep dive and learn about all these things, that could be a great way for you to do that without spending any kind of money on a legal 101 course, because I am here to help empower you to take care of your business in the way that it deserves. And I look forward to seeing you each and every week here on our YouTube channel, learning more about contracts and just getting behind the wheel a bit more, knowing that this isn't as scary as you thought it might be, or that other people told you. So if this has been interesting to you, make sure you've given it a like, a subscribe, maybe a tap on that notification bell if you want to make sure you don't miss out on any future videos, because I like to pack them jam full of content and value to make sure that I am helping you in the least amount of time possible, because I know that there's so much to consume here on YouTube, and I'm very grateful that you spent a few minutes with me today. I will see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.